Are your NPCs boring? Because mine certainly can be, especially in my first campaign. I've gotten a bit better about it 2 years later, but I still find myself struggling sometimes to make interesting and memorable NPCs. And I'm sure a lot of DMs out there feel that kind of pain. Writing memorable NPCs and characters can be difficult, and it is a very important thing, especially in a story rich campaign. So, here are 5 tips to make writing those NPCs just a little bit easier. Tip number 1. Make sure to give your NPCs a role to play in your campaign. Now, before we get into the actual meat of this tip, I'm going to use this time to clarify something. You should absolutely never make your NPCs the main characters of the story, because the players are the main characters of the story. NPCs should never overshadow the party. NPCs can be more powerful than the party, they can have higher roles in society, but in a story sense, the players are always the main characters. You need to remember that, because making an NPC the main character, even if it's unintentional, can really ruin the campaign for your players, as they're supposed to be the ones driving the story. That's part of the fun of D&D. Now remember, don't be so nervous about making an NPC that's a main character that you don't make NPCs interesting at all. You don't want to go in the complete opposite direction, but it's just important to remember, the players are the main characters. Just something worth clarifying. Okay, now let's get into the actual meat of the point. I often find that DMs will make NPCs to fill a quota or out of some kind of obligation. That is not the way it should be done. Every NPC you write has to have a purpose in the campaign, and the starting point to writing an interesting NPC is often just figuring out what you want that NPC to do. Are they a quest giver? Are they a shopkeeper? Are they a guard? Everything starts somewhere, and for writing NPCs, that is often the first step. This also connects to a point I made in an earlier video where I talked about not overextending yourself or overwhelming yourself. This applies to writing NPCs too. Don't overextend yourself too much past where your group are in the moment. If you make 1,000 NPCs that your group will never see, they're not going to care. Quality over quantity, especially when it comes to important characters. Of course, if you finish writing for the town that your group are in, or the organization that your group are meeting, then of course expand out your roster of NPCs. Feel free to do that, but just make sure that they're of quality and don't overextend yourself. Tip number 2. When introducing an important NPC, descriptions are everything. Saying a half-elven noble approaches you is not nearly as memorable as saying a half-elven woman wearing an immaculate white dress with a silver pin tying back her raven black hair approaches you with a curious gleam in her eye. Now there you go. That is a description. You don't need to do this for every single NPC, but for important ones, if you don't give them a proper description, you're really shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to making them interesting or memorable. Appearance is a big thing in all of media, and D&D is a game in your imagination. It's definitely not a visual medium, so your descriptions to your players are incredibly important to establishing NPCs. And it's not just appearance. Your description of their actions during combat or doing roleplay can really help to make them memorable. Now, what actions would they be doing? Well, we'll discuss that in tip number 3. Quirks. Quirks are everything. This is sort of a subset of tip number 2, but I think that this is even more important. If you've got descriptions down, then start writing quirks. I've gone over in the past the importance of quirks for player characters, I believe in the last video. However, for NPCs, I argue that this is even more important. Put quite simply, quirks make NPCs memorable. There is a character in my campaign. She's the queen of this very large country, and when the party met her on the battlefield, one quirk that I made sure to include in her character to make her stand out among all the other noblemen that they have met One quirk I gave her was that she wears no jewelry. She's a queen, a ruler of a nation, but she doesn't wear a crown or any sort of bracelets or necklaces. So that was interesting. I didn't tell them why she doesn't wear any jewelry. That's a character quirk that they'll figure out as they get to know her. However, it serves to differentiate her from the rest of the crowd and gives her a trait that the party can easily remember. These quirks can be anything from character-centric ones like that, or they can just be for fun. Take Victor from Critical Role and all his eccentricities. Those are quirks that make Victor one of the most interesting and memorable NPCs in that entire campaign, and Matt Mercer has created literally over 1,000 of those. So, yeah, quirks are incredibly important. Tip number 4. Make sure that these NPCs are neatly incorporated into the world, whether it be connecting them with a guild, connecting them with the players' backstories, connecting them with some sort of quest that the players are on. Make sure that these NPCs feel like a living member of this world. Now, that seems very broad and very difficult to do. How do you make a character feel like a living member of a world? Well, have them pop up in a tavern randomly. Just have them go to a tavern or have them go to a bookstore if they're interested in reading. Give them something interesting just to do in their day-to-day. These NPCs aren't just quest items, right? They're supposed to feel like actual people. So give them something to do while the party are having their downtime. I personally love doing this, and I don't really do it enough. Whenever an NPC pops up in downtime, it's always to give a quest hook, and I think that that is a big mistake on my part. If you use downtime effectively, you can use it to build up an NPC's character during their free time. Not everyone in this D&D world is always killing monsters or exploring dungeons. They do things just to relax, whether it be reading or drinking or dancing or whatever. So yeah, making an NPC a memorable part of your world is very important. And I was just talking about downtime, but this can also be quest related. Connecting NPCs to quests or important guilds in the game is also incredibly important. Having connections between NPCs is also really cool. Whether it be familial relations, friendships, associations through business, those can all be very interesting and make NPCs stand out to your party. Tip number 5. When writing interesting and memorable NPCs for your D&D game, it's important to remember that you need to start somewhere. Anywhere. It could be just utilizing your player's backstory as a bouncing point. It could be basing a character off of a show or movie that you're watching at the time. You just need to get a Google Doc or a pen and paper and just put some ideas down. I often see that new DMs get stuck when writing NPCs or writing anything in general. The first step to doing any of these tips, before you have to worry about overshadowing the party, before you need to worry about making a stat block for an NPC, before you worry about giving them quirks, you need to start writing them in the first place. Give them a role in the campaign, give them quirks, give them a personality, but always make sure to just get your ideas onto a paper or onto a Google Doc. Because if you just get stuck with random bits of ideas floating in your head, then you're never going to be able to write a single NPC. Player character backgrounds are an excellent place to start. Just using the characters that your players write for their own stories is a great way to fill out your world. Basing characters off other D&D games or other mediums entirely, such as shows or movies that you're watching at the time, is also great. Make sure not to steal characters, especially if your players watch those shows, movies, or D&D live streams. That's a great way to kind of take your players out of the experience. And also, writing characters yourself, when you really get into it, is fun. So I recommend not stealing things from shows, movies, other D&D games, but those characters, such as Arya Stark or Gilmore, they are a great bouncing point to create your own characters. Look into character archetypes when you're writing. There are plenty of character archetypes out there for you to use. Again, they're just baselines, they're just blueprints, but they're a great starting point. The point of this whole section is just make sure that when you are writing a character, you just start writing, because if you just put them in your head as an idea, it's never really going to come to fruition, if that makes sense. So yeah, always make sure to start writing a character with something like a show, movie, or player backstory. Just make sure to start somewhere. And that is going to wrap it up for today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more content from me, including an RPG horror story coming soon, then please do hit that subscribe button. And finally, if you have your own tips, thoughts, or stories, then go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.